Welcome, everyone. I'm Lori Lucchetti, president of BPB. We're happy that you could join us this evening, and we appreciate your support for our vision of bridging the hearts and minds of all people. We are very thankful that Nour Akhras is here from the Syrian Community Network and co-hosting this evening our Reading Refuge Book Club. Now more than ever, we need to bring all faiths together. Our collective hearts, our prayers, and our deeds are dedicated to promoting heightened efforts in addressing the humanitarian crisis and the conflicts in the Middle East. Our organizations need to continue to build our beloved communities through interfaith dialogues, proclaiming a commitment to eradicate hate, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism. Let us continue to uphold the core values of BPB, which are compassion, hope, integrity, inclusiveness, respect, and knowledge. We go forward together, embracing our friends, our family, and our community as we endeavor to exemplify the better angels of our nature. As many of you know, BPB bridges the gap for newcomers between what they receive from the resettlement agencies and the ultimate goal of reaching independence. Our mentoring program builds relationships with newcomer families rooted in trust, respect, and hope. We also understand the importance of educating our communities on the challenges that face newcomer populations. Our Reading Refuge Book Club is an important component of our educational program. I'd like to now turn it over to Suzanne, founder and executive director of Syrian Community Network. Thank you, Suzanne, for co-hosting tonight.
Thank you, Lori, and good evening, everyone. And I'm also joined by my development director, Lauren West, who is here with us and who helped in helping and organizing along with BPP. So thank you, Lori, and the Building Peaceful Bridges team and community for partnering with us on tonight's gathering. I was first introduced to Lori at the Refugee Action Network RAN meetings and the organization during the pandemic through these book club meetings. It was such a welcome way for me to continue to connect with others in support of the refugee community. And I'm so very excited that Syrian Community Network could be part of one with you all. At Syrian Community Network, or SCN, we work with refugees and other newcomers to meet their evolving needs through free services in case management, education, and immigration legal services. While our primary population is Arabic-speaking, we work with more than 1,400 individuals from over 20 countries last year alone. If you're interested in learning more about our work, I encourage you to check out our website or reach out to me or our team to get even further connected. And I'm so excited for everyone to hear from my amazing cousin, Dr. Nour Akhras, tonight. She and I were both born in Syria, and have had similar experiences as immigrants to the United States, as Muslim women and activists. She was one of the first people to support a medical mission for Syrian refugees and went to Turkey with a small group in 2011. She has since done so much more on behalf of refugees, which I will leave her to tell you about. I'm so proud of her for acting on her beliefs and for being a trailblazer in our community.
Thank you, Suzanne, for your introductory comments. Now I'd like to introduce KK Brown, one of our moderators for the evening. Take it away, KK.
Thanks, Lori. Tonight we're discussing Just One, a journey of perseverance and conviction. And we're fortunate enough to have with us here the author, Dr. Nour Akhras. Dr. Nour Akhras is a pediatric infectious disease physician and hospitalist who's been working at Freestanding Women and Children's Hospital in the suburbs of Chicago for the last decade. She's one of only 1,500 pediatric infectious disease physicians in the United States. She's traveled on multiple medical missions to serve Syrian refugees in Turkey, as well as Greece, and as well as helping displaced victims of war in Yemen. She served on the boards of NGOs like Med Global and the Syrian American Medical Society. And Dr. Akhras has advocated for the rights of refugees by authoring op-eds in local and national newspapers and via speaking engagements. As the Syrian crisis continues in its 12th year, she continues to advocate for peaceful change, such that the 6 million Syrian refugees displaced throughout the world can find a path home. Now we invite Dr. Akhras to read a passage from her book.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to Building Peaceful Bridges for inviting me. I really appreciate the invitation, and I wholeheartedly agree with your mission. And thanks to my cousin Suzanne for introducing me to this wonderful organization. I've done a bunch of these either in-person book clubs or speaking engagements about my book over the past few months since it's been published. And most of the time when I share a passage, there's one that I particularly like because I feel very connected to this woman who I met who was a mother. But tonight I'm going to share a different passage given the current political climate that we're living in and the fact that I'm a pediatrician. I've been advocating for children's rights and their health for the majority of my adult life. So once I start reading from this passage, you'll understand why I chose this one today. So this is from page 67, if you have the book. Have you ever had an experience where you could pinpoint the very moment when something completely horrible started? In Greece, I felt like there was one moment that I could identify when a teenager seemed as if he were about to follow the flock that would not lead to anything good for him. Adam was a 17-year-old young man residing in the refugee camps of Greece. His English was excellent. He had been hired as a translator by the NGO I volunteered with, and Adam relished his job. He was good at it, so he got to hang out with volunteer healthcare workers quite a bit. In Greece, as in Turkey, the refugees were not allowed out of the camps without permission. Because Adam was working as a translator, he had earned this privilege. He went out to lunch with us. Our team of multiple physicians, dental students, translators, and volunteers who were spread out among 3 different camps met in the town center for lunch daily. It was a welcomed reprieve because the cafe was air-conditioned in contrast to the small clinic areas where we worked, and the bathrooms were clean. Like the other refugees, Adam shared stories of how the war in Syria affected his life. He had to stop going to school. Many of his family members were arrested, tortured, and suffered. His home was bombed and his dad was killed. Now he was the head of the family and had to protect his mom and his sister. His job as a translator was to help bring income to the family. Adam described the journey crossing the sea, corroborating the stories of the others about the human smugglers who would sometimes lie and steal their money. Some smugglers drugged them so it would be easier to stuff more people on a rubber dinghy. Thus, the smugglers could make more money. They gave us life jackets, but I don't think they worked. The smuggler made us believe he was coming because he initially rode with us on the dinghy. We felt safer knowing that he was there because an expert rode with us. Most of us didn't know how to swim. He stopped to take a sip of his milkshake. But it was pitch black. We all had to leave at night because it afforded the best opportunity not to be caught by the Turkish military. Only 20 minutes into the journey at sea, a little powerboat pulled up to the dinghy and picked up the smuggler. He spoke, "Good luck," and he waved goodbye. When we screamed, "Where are you going?" he just replied, "You'll be fine. The tide will get you to Greece where people will take you in and you'll be safe." And that was the last time we ever saw him. With this, he took a bite of his burger. What options did we have except to believe him and pray that our dinghy makes it across safely and soundly? He asked as if there was an answer. Adam described with meticulous detail the wailing babies and the people vomiting into the middle of the dinghy because they were seasick. He described how cold they got as the waves came crashing into the dinghy in the dark of night. I heard the anger in his voice when he asked, "Where was the international community when that happened to us? Where was the UN? Where were the defenders of democracy? All people in Syria wanted was the right to a democratically elected government." His voice started rising and everyone in the cafe looked at him. Where were the champions of human rights? Don't we have the right to live in dignity?
I love that passage. I think you write with such empathy, particularly in general, particularly here when you share that story about Adam. And I imagine that your personal experience is a huge lens through which you experience stories like Adam's. And you write at one point that you didn't know why it had never occurred to you until 2016 that you yourself were a refugee. And that was like, I love your words, you say it was like waking up to a new reality of who I had always been. So on the heels of that powerful passage about Adam, I'm wondering if you can tell us more about your personal experience identifying as a refugee and how has that shape the lens with which you receive stories like this?
Yeah, I mean, when I moved to the United States, I was so young. When my family moved, I was 4 years old. So I don't really have any recollection of life before. I don't have any memories of what my life was like in Syria before we moved here. And so, of course, growing up, I had known my whole life that I wasn't born in the United States, but I didn't think of myself as a refugee. Like, that thought hadn't really ever crossed my mind. And then I had been to refugee camps, and still the thought had never crossed my mind. And it wasn't until the candidacy of President Donald Trump that it dawned upon me, when he particularly was, standing on stage and making disparaging remarks about immigrants or migrants or refugees. And when there was a focus on some DACA recipients, there was 100 medical student DACA recipients who had written a letter in I think it was 2016, and they had written a letter to a Boston radio show, trying to convince fellow Americans of why they should be allowed to stay in the United States. And it was at that point I thought to myself, like, wait, that could have been me. Like, it's not like my parents didn't consult with me at the age of 3 or 2 when they made the decision to move to the United States. Nobody consulted with me. So that could have easily been me. And to think about how hard it was to get to medical school, to get into medical school and start medical school and be in medical school, and to think about that, that prospect of being deported to somewhere you don't know, that's really when it hit me, like, oh my God, he's talking about people like me that, he's trying to scare the American people from, that they're going to do all of these horrible things. And, I personally have done a lot to contribute to the fabric of society, but that shouldn't even matter. Like, even if I didn't do anything, my humanity or my existence as a human being should be enough to, make a case for me staying. I have never done anything wrong. I'm not a criminal. I haven't, done anything against the law, and I didn't come here out of my free will. You know what I'm saying? So that was when I, started to really navigate that, like, oh, he's talking about people like me.
Absolutely. And I'm so impressed throughout the book, the way, speaking to your medical experiences and your everything you have to offer professionally. And that's such a big part about this book. But I love that you not only come at it from the medical lens and from your unique, one of only 1,500 people who do what you do in the United States, but you also, you make a point to say, but just as a human, I see these things as a doctor and also as a human, not just because I have this unique background. But in thinking of your unique career, I was impressed with how much trust comes through in everything that you do, and especially with kids. You recount the trust that you have to establish with the parents and children in the work that you were doing in Turkey and Greece and Yemen. And you recount the devastating effects that you saw fear having on these children's capacity for trust. So I'm just curious, from your personal and medical experience, can you tell us more about the long-term effects that fear like this has on children? And then what can we do to support children who arrive in our communities?
Yes, so there's a lot of recent studies in the literature that talk about how fear affects child development, how children who face traumatic experiences, especially repeated traumatic experiences, how that shapes their brain. It actually restructures how the brain develops. And that, when we're in such stress or such, traumatic experiences, our body produces a hormone called norepinephrine or epinephrine or adrenaline. They're the same. And that hormone suppresses the way that we're able to learn and form social ties. And so these traumatic experiences have long-term effects, and children don't know how to navigate stress, and they don't know how to kind of calm down their emotional activity, and a lot of times there'll be things that will re-trigger that response. So, for example, if you're in the house and your mom is making spaghetti and then a bomb goes off, you may associate the smell of spaghetti or the marinara sauce with a traumatic experience. And so maybe 3 or 4 years later, you're in a safe environment, but somebody's making some spaghetti, and that kind of triggers your flight or fright response. And obviously you have no idea why that's happening. And the studies also show that it's not enough to move children out of the traumatic space. So they can't really extinguish that process. That process has to be kind of unlearned, and they need to make new neuronal connections around those experiences. And that can't happen until they're a little bit more mature, and they can go through things like cognitive behavioral therapy. And so, but the problem is, by the time, that takes time for them to mature enough to be able to do that. And so there's all of these years that their brain isn't able to make healthy connections or take in education as they should. And so children, if you read any child development book or parenting books, it all talks about how children need structure, children need routine. And so it's important that when they do come to a safe space, that routines are established. So for people working with refugee children, that routine is really important. So like, if you're telling them, like, I'm going to visit you every Thursday, really try to do that. Like, I know things happen, and, people have their lives, and a lot of people are just volunteers. But when it comes to children, it's kind of a very different ballgame than it is with adults. So if you try, just try to like keep the routine the same as much as you can, as much as humanly possible. But it does take a long time for children to recover from these traumatic experiences.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that also oftentimes you notice that like it's not obvious when a child is, experiencing that. I think a lot of the children we interact with seem like very happy and bubbly, and it's we have to remind ourselves that they've had these experiences, and so we have to I think it's good to like keep that in the back of your mind. Of course, they're normal kids like everybody else, but it's important to remember that they've had these experiences when we are working with them. So kind of on a similar note, in reflecting in your post 9/11 experience, you wrote, "We were too scared to share our experiences, as if sharing them would make us more suspicious." So do you have any advice for us as BPB bridge builders and neighbors on how to create safe spaces for refugees to share their experiences?
Yeah, I think it's also, again, consistency. I mean, you're not going to meet somebody on the first day and they're going to tell you that they were raped in Syria, for example. Like, that's just not going to happen. But having consistent relationships and building that trust is really key to get people to open up about their traumatic experiences or what's happened to them or what led them. And then just being curious too. Like, a lot of times I think that maybe we don't, even as healthcare workers, I try to make it a point, at least myself, to say, like, how did you come to be here? And just leave it like open-ended, like not assuming anything, just how did you come to be here? And being supportive and caring and compassionate. All of those things are important, but I think one of the most important things is just consistency, and just just being a listening ear for someone, and then at the consistent relationship. I think that will help people open up to you and share their experiences.
Definitely. And I think this theme of connection is throughout the book. Obviously, it's a big part of the work that you do here in the United States, but was also a consistent thread in the descriptions of Turkey and Greece and Yemen. And I particularly loved your description of connection when you were in Greece after volunteering and you're checking out of your hotel. On page 71, you wrote, "The hotel owner gestured upward, conveying that God would reward me for my humanitarian work. I verbalized the same prayer for him, and even though we did not share the same faith, at that moment, we both silently acknowledged that none of that mattered, that what united us was far greater than what made us different, and I did not need to speak his language to understand him at his core." We loved this message and think it's especially important in the work that we do. And we'd love to hear more about the connection and the threads that you see uniting refugees and humanitarians?
I mean, at the end of the day, we're all human, right? So I think just remembering, for example, if you're a parent, like just knowing that refugee parents want the same thing for their children that you want for yours. So I want my children to grow up in a safe space. I want my children to get an education. I want my children to stay healthy and be happy and successful. And that's what they want too. And if you're not a parent and the other refugee's not a parent, then they want the same things that we want. We all want to stay healthy. We all want to stay safe. We all want to be able to go after things that will help us succeed in life. And so just kind of, we might not like the same drink, or we might not like the same food, for example, but at the end of the day, our humanity is what ties us. And I think those things are so much bigger than the things that we try to convince ourselves that we're so different on.
Yes, absolutely. So as a nurse, I found it really interesting that you talk about how when describing your time in Yemen, you noticed that like there's like a Despacito, a popular song, has made, its way to Yemen from the United States, but not APGARs, which is, for those who don't know, a scoring system for newborns' health. So can you tell us more about how and why you think things like pop culture trends spread faster than these, really important life-saving healthcare practices such as APGARs?
I mean, life-saving practices require investment, and if people are not investing in these areas, then they're not gonna receive the education or the technology necessary to catch up, for example, to like Western medicine in the United States or things like that, which is one of the reasons I really appreciate Med Global as an organization, which if you see on the back of the book, I've decided that I would donate a portion of the proceeds from this book, which for people who don't know, writing a book isn't a particularly lucrative experience. Anyways, but that's one of the reasons that I've decided to donate a portion to Med Global, because they are interested in kind of teaching, and it's not like, historically medical missions have been kind of like a savior complex, like you go in and you're like the savior and then you're there for a week and then you leave. But I appreciate about Med Global that they're really invested in the systems that they're trying to work with and work within, and so they teach life-saving things like this, like APGARs, like resuscitating newborns, like point of care ultrasound, and so these things take investment. While as pop culture, if you have internet, then you're exposed to these things. So that was like the young man who was listening to Despacito on the side of the sidewalk. It was on his phone through the World Wide Web, but these other big things, they really take a lot of investment, time, money, effort, and people interested in the region. So that's why I think that there's a slower catch up rate in that area.
And for those of you who, maybe didn't read the book yet, Dr. Nour Akhras is speaking to her time in Yemen, which is the trip that you took when you were newly pregnant, right, Nour? And
yes.
Ellie, that one really blew Ellie my way. And I was impressed with your description of the power of prayer, particularly as a medical profession, throughout the book. And my favorite was that prayer that, I'm sure I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but the Istikhara prayer, this is a prayer that guided you in the hard decision to travel to Yemen, where you say, if it is God's, if it is the will for me to do this, then point me in that direction. If it's not the will, point me in that direction. We would just love to hear more about what inspired you to make such a brave and difficult decision.
Well, in my faith, in our religion, we have a mandatory portion of our wealth that has to go to charity every year. So annually, 2.5% of your annual accrued wealth has to go to charity. So most people do that in our month of fasting, but you don't have to do it in that month. But once a year, you have to look at like how much money you have, and you're supposed to give out 2.5% to charity, and that's supposed to purify your wealth. So I always think about like not just my wealth, I just think about like blessings that I have. And when I think about my education, like I can't like not think about that as something that, you know, God has given me. And I always think about like I'm going to be asked about that. Like God's going to say, what did you do with that education I gave you? You know, like I gave you a very specific opportunities, you know. And you know, besides Yemen, like I've never fielded a phone call from either a friend or somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who's like, oh, she's infectious disease. I've never fielded a phone call that I haven't, you know, tried my best to answer that question for that person's child, as if it's my own child. Because again, I always go back to like, God's going to ask me, going to say, I gave you this. What did you do with it? Did you just hoard it for yourself? So like you just used, you know, you used the education to make money, and then you were successful and you built a big house for you and your kids. Is that what you did with it? Or did you use it to help other people? And so that was like ultimately the deciding factor for me was, you know, that I can't be selfish about what I know, and I need to help people with it. And you know, if this door was being open to me, then I needed to consider walking through the door, because, you know, again, like I just think that if God gives you these blessings, then you need to use them in ways that are helpful to others.
I love that. I think that's a wonderful call to action for all of us. And I think that in talking about the refugees, you talk about their gifts as much as you talk about the gifts of the humanitarians. And I love that point about being impressed with the way that on your trips you went as teachers, and not just to have a savior complex to bring your gifts and then leave. And something we talked about was the way that you write that in every refugee tent you visited, you were invited to sit down and have something to drink or eat, which is an experience many of us have with the BP, with the families that are a part of building peaceful bridges that we love and appreciate. And you said these people who may have lost everything were the most hospitable, open, and welcoming people. And I think so often we focus on the gifts that we have to offer refugees, but I'd love to hear from you more about the talents and gifts that you're seeing refugees bring to our communities that we should be keeping in mind.
I mean, everybody has something to offer. Everybody has something that they bring to the table that's different than you. And it's true. Like I mean, you guys share that experience, and anybody I've talked to who's gone on a medical mission or who's had this experience will say the same thing. Like people were so nice and hospitable and open, and it just blows my mind that people who are like more have way more gifts or way more blessings or way more money or way more whatever are the ones that are like, no, mine, don't come. You're going to take my job. You're going to take my this and that. Whereas people who have nothing will be like, oh, do you want a cup of tea? Do you want to share a piece of bread? You know? But I think, you know, everybody has something to offer, whether it's, you know, whether it's an education or their talent or, you know, just the human experience. So I think that, you know, meeting people and talking to them is the best way to kind of identify what their talents are, what they can offer, or what, you know, what gifts they have, whether it's even like, I know many refugees have come and opened restaurants in different areas, and their meals are amazing. Some have been musicians, some have been carpenters, some have been tailors. Like there's so many things that people can bring to the table. And then there's, you know, people who are like, who are physicians in Syria, or, you know, or their country of origin, engineers, whatever they were. And, you know, it does take a long time to translate their education to a different language, but ultimately they still have that, you know, education, and they have that ability to contribute to society. So I just think it's, you know, we just need to be patient and welcoming and open to see what they have to offer.
Yes, we consistently hear in these book clubs that that sentiment of it starts with a conversation, and that's partly why we love these community outreach events.
So you describe how difficult it was to return to your normal day-to-day life after these medical mission trips. And so while most of us are not experiencing firsthand the current situation in the Middle East, I think a lot of us have seen, the horrific footage and heard stories on the news and social media. So I was wondering if you had any advice that you've learned from those returns from your trips for those of us who are struggling with going about, our normal day-to-day lives while this is happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling too, honestly. Like the other day, I did this interfaith. I did an interfaith event at our mosque where we invited people from different faiths to kind of grieve together and pray together. And I said to them, like, I know I'm not the only one doom scrolling, right? Like that's a thing now. People just doom scroll, or just watching video after video, or just watching horrific things. And I think so some of the things I've been trying to do to get me out of this funk, I guess you could say, is to turn off the phone. I can't really turn off my phone because it's my pager, but just at least like get it out of my hand, and go outside and take a walk. And so I've been doing a lot of walking in the last 2 weeks, taking a big breath of fresh air, and also spending time in ways that I feel like are productive to help. So whether that's, again, here I am bringing up Med Global again, but I know Med Global has been on the ground in Gaza at least for the last 6 years. So helping, direct people to, if they're asking about where to donate money, or, I've been to a couple of rallies that are calling for a ceasefire. So just different things to kind of help end the cycle of violence. So I feel like I'm contributing in some small way, even though I don't know if anybody's going to listen to me, or, I'm just one person. But you still have to try your best to do what you can, I think. But definitely, trying to get off of social media or media in general, and just, trying to reconnect with your family, with your friends, with people that you know. It's hard. I'm not gonna lie and say like, oh, it's been easy, but if you're suffering yourself, you're not going to be of help to anybody. So it's really important to all of us to take care of ourselves. So that's the reason why the flight attendant tells you to put on your oxygen mask first, right? Because you can't help anybody else if you can't breathe. So it's the same thing. You need to take care of your mental health first so that you can help others, whether that's people in your immediate family or anybody even who's far away from you.
And I know you say, Nour, I may just be one person, but I really loved in your book when you describe the belief that in your religion, there's the belief that if you save one person, you save all of humanity, right? I loved that. Will you tell the group a little bit more about that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so there is this verse in the Quran that says if you save one life, it's as if you saved all of humanity, and the inverse, that if you take away a life, unjustly, it's as if you've killed all of humanity. So I try to focus on that a lot, because I think about that a lot, like on my missions or even in my day-to-day work, like who is this little baby that maybe I've helped save this baby's life, who knows who they're going to grow up to be, and so especially as a pediatrician, like being able to like look at children and their potential. I also think a lot about people will say about refugees or migrants, like, you don't know what they're capable of. And I'm like, yeah, we don't know what they're capable of. Like, what if we give them education and security? Let's see what they're capable of, So people usually spin it in a negative way. But for me as a pediatrician, especially, I always think like, God, yeah, we don't know what this child will be capable of. Like, what if this child goes on to X, Y, or Z, And so for me, just focusing on every human life as, first of all, a gift, and one that has really big potential, has really helped me along the way.
I love that we never know what anyone's capable of in the best, most positive of ways. I think we have at least one question in the chat. If we want to invite, please, group, feel free to add questions in the chat, but I can go ahead and we have this one from Nita. From a social determinants or drivers of health perspective, what do you see as the biggest need in the community and pediatric perspective?
I mean, if you're talking about like refugees and migrants, I think that the biggest need from a pediatric and community perspective is again safety and security and routine. So like, you know, if I think about the Syrian refugees, for example, the ones that were most affected by the recent earthquake, I've read a lot of things about saying that some of these families have been displaced 20 times. So if you think about a child who was born in 2011 or 2012, that child hasn't lived in the same place for 1 year. I mean, being displaced 20 times in the last decade means that you've lived, you know, 2 places every year. And for a child to kind of experience no routine and moving so much, like that's just detrimental to their development. So I think from the pediatric perspective, you know, having a child or a family in a safe space for a long time, and then being able to establish a routine for them, I think is probably the biggest need. And you know, so when I think about like the recent migrants to Chicago, for example, and how they're trying to set up spaces for them. And you know, I've gone to Humboldt Park and a couple of parks around here over the summer, and you know, seeing these families in tents, and you know, it brings back memories of people from, you know, Syria who I've met, even though, you know, these people are coming from South America or Central America, and you know, walking up, and I always think about too, like in the time of social media and cell phones, where everybody's sending videos back to their family of what this experience is like, and it's not pleasant. I'm sure it's not pleasant walking from Central America or South America up through the United States, and then either like getting to Texas and then bust off to Chicago. The experience is not pleasant by any means, but yet people keep coming. And so you have to ask yourself, why are they still coming if the experience is so unpleasant and their families are literally sending them videos or images? And so again, I think, you know, for the pediatric perspective, just having a safe space, a safe, clean space, and a routine where the kids can go to school and just feel that normalcy for a couple of years at least, before like we talk about like the bigger issues of you know, their mental health and kind of reacclimating to safety and security.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the question. It looks like we have another one from Nikki. How does one try to give a sense of belonging to a refugee?
I think kids are really resilient. So I think once they start going to school and stuff, and I read a study, I want to say the other day, and it was talking about Syrian refugee kids who moved to Germany, and who had been there like maybe 5 to 10 years, and they were asking them, and those kids really had an affinity to Germany, even though they were Syrian refugees. And it's just it was just remarkable to read that you know, even though they had been there maybe 4 or 5 years, they had such an affinity and loyalty to Germany. And so I think, you know, a sense of belonging for kids comes easier when they're in school and things like that. For the adults, I'm not really sure. I do think like just again including them in activities, being consistent, and you know, the political climate currently is very difficult, and I'm gonna, you know, speak honestly. I've lived here for more than 40 years, and with what's going on in the media right now, I think especially Muslim Americans, Arab Americans are even ones who've been here their whole lives aren't feeling a lot of belonging. And you know, there's a lot of demonizing language, there's a lot of dehumanizing language right now, and so kind of trying to counter that may be helpful. I'm not 100% sure how to answer that question for adults.
No, that was so helpful. Thank you. We have a couple more from Moira and Carrie. Moira, would you like to read your question?
Unmute. Yes, I just wondered, I was so intrigued, this is a little bit aside from the refugee issue, but your contribution to the Golden Minute just really struck my heart, that you were able to observe what was going on with these babies and actually make a change that could really improve so many children's lives. And I just wondered if you could tell everyone about it who didn't read the book, because I just thought it was remarkable.
Yeah, thanks. So when I was in Yemen, I had a lot of patients, or their families would come and describe their child's symptoms, and it was clear to me that their child had cerebral palsy, and I would see child after child, and I was like, wow, God, these are a lot of children with cerebral palsy. Like that number seems really high. Like, this is so unusual. And I knew we had a selection bias because people were not, healthy families weren't going to bring their healthy child to see a doctor. But then it was just really unusual. And so I would start asking them, like, where was your child born? And then they would say, this city or that city. And I'm like, no, like, where was the child? Like, where was the woman when she delivered this child? Was she in a hospital? Was she at home? And it turned out that a lot of women in Yemen delivered at home. And so when I kept probing, and then I asked the health minister, like, who tends to these births at home? And he said, oh, the midwife, we have a lot of midwives. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like, and are they trained in pediatric medicine? And he's like, no. And I'm like, what? And then he goes, yeah, they're just trained to birth women. And I'm like, and the baby? And he's like, no, they're trained to birth the woman and take care of the woman. And it just blew my mind. Like, how is that even possible? That they deliver the baby and they just, I don't know, put it down somewhere, and then they just tend to the woman. And where here in the United States, there's usually somebody dedicated for the baby. It's in many hospitals, if it's a healthy newborn, it could be a nurse that's dedicated to, just make sure that the baby's okay. But there's always backup, like the pediatrician can, be called in, or a lot of times there's pediatric teams. Like, I've been to 1 million deliveries myself as a pediatric resident and a pediatric hospitalist. And we, tend to the baby. And so the golden minute is the first minute of life where it's really important to make sure that the baby's oxygenating. And that if they're crying and they're red and they're, vigorous, but if they're limp and they're not crying, that means they're not getting oxygen. And so that first minute can, determine whether the baby suffers an anoxic brain injury, or like lack of oxygen to the brain. And then that can lead to cerebral palsy. So it was making sense to me that if they're not trained to take care of the baby and nobody's tending to the baby, that a lot of the babies could suffer anoxic brain injuries or hypoxic brain injuries. And so after our trip, when we came back from Yemen, Med Global established the Helping Babies Breathe program, which trains the medical people here are trained how to train other people, and then they go and train midwives and other healthcare workers on how to resuscitate newborn babies.
That's incredible. Ellie, I was expecting you to come off and say how much you love that. I don't know if Ellie shared this, but she was a labor and delivery nurse for many years. So
That was cool. Babies Breathe. It's very cool. I was very excited when I read that you were a part of that. It's so cool. Let's see, we do have a couple more. From Carrie, do you want to come off and read your question?
Sure. I was just wondering, because you do talk about, there's a passage about how it affects these experiences, these refugee experiences affect the whole family. So I was wondering just if you could, talk a little bit about, there's so many generations that are being affected by this displacement. So how do you, describe that or help us? Because we work with that once we meet the families on this side. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like in Syria, for example, I had met, in Greece, I had met a grandmother who was taking care of her grandchild, and her son, who was the father of the grandchild, was in another country. He was in Germany. And so, a lot of, in war and particularly in the Middle East, there's intergenerational trauma. And a lot of people in the Middle East, for example, they have, there will be a building of like 3 or 4 apartments or condominiums, and usually it's like, you know, 4 or 5 brothers who are married and they have their families. They're all living in the same building. So that building is bombed, and then, you know, the whole family either has lost their home. And then sometimes like the parents are also living in that building. So there's intergenerational trauma in that way. And so, you know, and especially now, like the war in Syria has been going on for 10 years as a generation. So this is a generation. And so of course it's going to affect parents and child and then grandchild in different ways. And it's just, I think the most important thing is just to support them all in any way we can. A lot of times when people are vetted to come to the United States, not everybody is able to come because the vetting process is so extensive. And so families are broken up because, for example, in my experience, it seems like healthy young men are excluded a lot of times from being accepted as refugees into the United States. So like a family will come, like maybe like the mom is accepted, but then the husband isn't accepted. Or like I met a family who the man in the family is paraplegic, and then his wife, his mom and his sister got accepted, but his healthy brother didn't get accepted. So the mom and sister didn't come with him, and so just him and his wife and his children came. So I mean, there's that aspect too, where like not whole families are accepted as refugees into the United States, and because of the vetting process and the way it is. So just kind of recognizing that too, like a lot of Syrian families at least are so broken up now. Like some are in Germany, some are in the Netherlands, some are in Turkey, some are in Greece, some are in Egypt, some are, you know, they're like all over the place. And so the ones we find in the United States a lot of times are isolated. It's not like they came with their, you know, brothers and uncles and this and that. And so it's important to recognize that as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions from the group?
I think Nikki was asking at the last, maybe Nikki, did you want to address?
No, I basically enjoyed that interfaith prayer session. It sort of calmed me down a little bit, you know, and I'm wondering, particularly now, and this is going to go on, not what is the situation that we have now is not going to stop tomorrow. You know, whether it's possible to hold these sessions more frequently, not just for people like us, but to bring the people who've experienced recent traumas, and that, you know, there are people who are willing to help, people from all faiths who are coming together, you know, and so the paranoia, to decrease the paranoia, to decrease the fiction that is maybe making it worse.
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. I actually just sent a letter to our school board because there had been some students protesting, and then some families were mad about it. And, you know, there's been a lot of conflict in my high schooler's school, even though my high schooler, he's just like so oblivious to everything. But anyways, that's besides the point. So I sent a letter to the school board and the principal saying, you know, first of all, it's important to not censor, you know, kids who want to voice something. But at the same time, I said, our school district is one of the most diverse in the United States, and we have a lot of kids from different areas and different faiths and different cultures. And I said, maybe what we can do is foster some sessions where kids from different faiths or cultures can talk to each other. And I said, you know, our schools could lead locally, nationally, or internationally on this front. And I bet you the ability for a child to communicate across lines or across faiths is a way more important skill to learn than any math, science, art, or literature course that can be offered in any high school. Anyways, nobody replied to me, but I think they've been inundated with emails from across the city. But I agree with you, like there's no way that we can move past what's going on without dialogue and interfaith talking to each other and praying with each other and just seeing each other as human. Like I just watched an interview with Queen Rania of Jordan, with
Yeah.
Christiane Amanpour, and she said that this conflict in the Middle East is not going to be solved by war. It will only be solved at the negotiating table, and I absolutely agree with her. This is not going to solve anything. War is not going to solve anything. Killing people is not going to solve anything on either side. Like none of this is going to solve anything, and unless people can come to the negotiating table and talk, this cycle will continue. Maybe it'll quiet down in a week or 2 weeks, but this cycle will perpetuate.
It's an eye for an eye doesn't make you two eyes, it makes you blind. But you know, the next rally should be a rally for peace with signs of everybody. We want peace.
Yeah.
That's all we want is peace. You know, and that's all the people who are living there want is peace. You know, so yeah, it's really disturbing at the present time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We're so grateful that you've shared your story with us. And we think that your courage and determination will definitely inspire others, including us, to hopefully share their gifts. And we look forward to continuing to see what's next for you. Maybe more books, maybe more trips, but we'll be staying tuned, whatever it is.
Yeah, we want updates from you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to ask the last question we have in here because I want to know the answer. So do you have any insights and observations on how we can help our families interact with the U.S. medical system? So this might be something, you know, that we tap you for at a later date. But if you have any thoughts on that right now.
I mean, the medical system is hard to navigate, even for me.
Yes.
You know, it's so complicated and cumbersome, and it doesn't make any sense, and it's frustrating. And I mean, I could go on and on as a patient, not even as a physician, as a patient. Like I could go on and on about all of the frustrations I've faced. And this is me knowing the medical system in and out, like knowing how to work it, like knowing like the best time to go to the ER is 5 a.m. Don't tell anybody I told you, but you know, just like these little things. It's important to go with somebody, obviously, to help them navigate the system, because a lot of times they don't obviously speak the language, and so making sure that they have a translator, and that what their needs are actually getting translated. Even the translators sometimes, like, they don't even translate right. Like, it's just such a broken system. I mean, we could go on for hours about the broken healthcare system in this country, but I think it's important to, you know, like one of the things I do tell people is to help refugees like sort through junk mail, you know, for example. Like, people don't know what junk mail is. Like, they think everything is important, but just helping them, you know, navigate, like, okay, this is what HIPAA means. It just means that, you know, you have the right to privacy. Or, you know, I think just kind of being there to tell them what's an important document, what may not be that important, that you don't really like need to, you know, nobody reads those things, right? We all just sign. They tell you to sign this thing and you just sign it. So just those things, and just advocating for them to actually have a translator who speaks their language for sure, and not letting the healthcare worker get away with like either their broken Arabic or whatever, you know, second language it is, or a lot of times healthcare workers don't even get a translator. They just, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's so disrespectful and it's so wrong. But I think if I had to pick one thing, it would be to make sure that the family has a translator who's actually translating their needs and their concerns to the healthcare worker, and making sure that the healthcare worker kind of acknowledges that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. All right, Lori, we can turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Ellie. Okay. Nour, thank you for everything, for all those comments, to all of our questions and that. I'd like to give Suzanne the opportunity to do a close. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Nour, for your willingness to share your experiences with us tonight. You have beautifully articulated how the value and dignity of every human life is equal. And that is critical to put us at the core of our thinking, our words, our actions, as it relates to the devastating events of the past 3 weeks in Gaza and Israel. The struggle of all marginalized groups are interconnected, and liberation and safety for everyone is only available together. Hate and violence only begets more hate and violence. We must stand up for our neighbors and friends. We should not stand for Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, or hate of any kind towards others. Our humanity must bring us together, not drive us further apart. As Nour was vulnerable enough to describe in such a public manner how she has felt as a Muslim woman living in the United States, I hope we recognize that many people are living in fear and uncertainty instead of love and support from their communities. We can do better. Nour, when I first read your book, I was really touched that in some small way, you've been inspired by the work we're doing at Syrian Community Network and Med Global and all of your trips. Just amazing. It is inspiring to see the amount of mental and emotional work that you have surmounted to write and publish this book and to be so valuable with us here tonight. To be so vulnerable, with us here tonight. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say that your words are a spark of encouragement for delving further into support of refugees. I also hope that everyone here recognizes that you do not have to leave the US soil to make a difference in the lives of refugees. I encourage you to get involved with us, Building Peaceful Bridges, and the many other organizations who are helping refugees or asylum seekers being bused from the southern border. You can donate, volunteer, and advocate to make a difference. I also want to thank Building Peaceful Bridges again for your wonderful partnership and for creating a space like this one for folks to come together, learn, and act. We appreciate you all and the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne, for your comments. And I second it. I think there's so many of our organizations that the more we work together to address the necessity of getting all faiths together on these issues and getting children, Nour, I think children should be brought together to talk about these issues and that. And it would be the best learning of kindness and respect for each other. The math, the other subjects can come second. So again, I thank you for sharing your book and all of your insights. Suzanne, thank you for being here tonight and co-hosting. It's a pleasure always working with your organization. You do amazing things, and thank you for that. KK and Ellie did a great job moderating. Thank you again. And we look at this point, we would love to invite everyone we have an annual event in November, which we call Gather for Good. And it's a time, especially now, that it's really important that we come together in the spirit of mutual understanding and deep respect for all faiths. So we ask everyone if you're welcome to join fellow bridge builders as we unite to celebrate our mission, which is bridging the hearts and minds of all people. I know Kevin put the link in the chat if you'd like to register, and we'd love to see you there. So again, thank you everyone for coming tonight and making this such an educational and moving evening. Blessings to everybody and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.